Stop, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now, we have new stories every day. Now let's go. I will never understand why people do things that upset others. I went through life trying not to disturb anyone, and maybe it was too much for me to expect the same from others. I met my wife, Linda, when we were in school, and we had been exclusive since we were 16. Everyone knew about it. We got married right after Linda's 21st birthday. My lifelong friend, Alan Hunter, was my best man, and Linda's sister, Mary, along with her 2 nieces, were bridesmaids. If someone had asked me, I would have said Linda was beautiful and everything I wanted in a wife. We bought a nice house on a quiet street in a good neighborhood. 2 years after the wedding, Linda became pregnant with our son, Nick, and 18 months later, she gave birth to our daughter, Gail. Since we only wanted 2 children, I had a vasectomy after Gail was born. By the way, my name is Don Simmons, and I work as a production manager at a company that manufactures specialized lifting machines and cranes. I earn well, so for Linda, being a stay-at-home mom was never a problem. That was the case until a few years later when a problem arose. Linda was still a very attractive woman. Her C-cup breasts and shapely rear still turned me on, though it's a shame they did the same for someone else. I thought life was perfect, or at least as perfect as it could be. The kids behaved well, and we enjoyed a good social life. Once a month, my parents would take the kids so Linda and I could have a date night. We usually went out to dinner, followed by a few hours at a club, and when we returned home, we always made love. My so-called perfect life fell apart on a Wednesday afternoon. I had been at the dentist and decided to go home right after. It was a quiet day at work, so I figured no one would miss me for the rest of the day. I walked into the house and froze in place. The noise I heard upstairs hinted that Linda was either having fun with a toy or she had a man up there. I quietly sneaked upstairs, deciding that if she was alone, missing out on afternoon sex would be foolish. Apparently, Linda had the same idea. I peeked through the door of our bedroom and saw my so-called friend, Alan Carter, having sex with her. Losing my mind, I stormed into the room. "You bastard!" I yelled. I threw a punch that landed on Alan's jaw. He cried out in pain and fell off the bed. Linda screamed and frantically covered herself. I snapped, turning my attention back to that scumbag, grabbing him by the hair. I pulled him toward me and punched him several times in the face and stomach, finishing with a final blow to the groin. "Get out of my house, you bastard!" As soon as he had his clothes on, I dragged him to the door and threw him out, then stormed back upstairs. "How long?" I yelled at Linda. She trembled and said nothing. "How long have you been sleeping with that snake?" I asked again. Linda stared at me with tears in her eyes. "About 2 months. I didn't want this done. It just happened." "Yeah, sure. Clean yourself up and get this place in order before the kids get home. I'm leaving for a bit, but I'll be back at the usual time," I said sarcastically before heading downstairs and walking out of the house. I parked the car in a local parking lot and went for a walk to clear my head. Until today, I was sure that Linda loved me as much as I loved her. I had no idea she was sleeping with my so-called best friend. Nothing at home had changed. There was nothing that would have raised my suspicions. I decided that I couldn't let this go unnoticed. Some mistakes I could forgive, but not this one. I chose not to say anything to Linda, except that I needed time to think. That evening, she tried to apologize, but I ignored her and fell asleep on the couch. The next day, I called work and took the rest of the week off. Thankfully, no one asked why. My lawyer tried to talk me out of filing for divorce, saying I wouldn't come out of it too well. I told him it was my decision and to file against Linda as soon as possible. My next stop was the bank. I transferred most of our savings to an account Linda couldn't access. As far as I'm concerned, she doesn't deserve to get any money from me. When I returned home, Linda tried to talk to me, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in your pathetic excuses, Linda. Leave me alone." As Linda left, she started crying. I locked myself in my home office so I wouldn't have to see her. When the kids came home from school, I went downstairs to greet them, and they were both happy that I was home early. Linda was talking on her cell phone while I chatted with the kids. Gail is 9, and I don't think she understands what's going on. Nick, on the other hand, was watching Linda and me closely, and from his expression, I could tell he knew something was wrong. When Linda noticed me watching her, she ended the call and came over to talk to the kids. There's never a good time to make an announcement like mine, but I decided to do it now. I told the kids that their mom and dad didn't love each other anymore. I reassured them that I would still be around and see them as often as I could. The look on Linda's face was one of shock. I think if the kids hadn't been there, it would have ended in a shouting match. Nick sat quietly, staring at the floor, while Gail climbed onto my lap and held me tightly, crying her heart out. I looked at Linda with a gaze that said, "This is all your fault." Linda turned and went into the kitchen, and I could hear her quietly crying. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Linda tried to talk to me. Please, Don, can we discuss this? No, we can't, I replied before heading to my home office. I spent the entire night sleeping in my office chair just to avoid listening to Linda's whining. The next morning, when Linda took the kids to school, she said she was going to her parents' house, but I didn't care since I was planning to find a new place to live. Luckily, there was an apartment about a mile from home, so I rented it and returned to start packing my things. By the time Linda came back from her parents' house, I had already packed almost all my clothes. So, you're leaving? Yes, I told you I'm leaving, and nothing you can say or do will change my decision. Would it help if Alan talked to you and apologized? No, it wouldn't help. In fact, you can tell that Dan Snake to stay far away from me. If I see him again, I'll most likely finish what I started the other day. Linda turned away and started crying, to hell with her tears. It was her fault anyway. While I was loading my things into the car, a man approached the house and called out to Linda. "Mrs. Linda Simmons?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Linda Simmons. You've been served." He handed Linda the envelope and quietly walked away. "Please, Don, please don't do this to our family." "I'm not the one who did this to our family, Linda. You did." I got into the car and drove away, leaving Linda in tears at the door. I filed for divorce, citing adultery. Linda asked me to change the grounds to irreconcilable differences, but I refused to even consider it. At the very least, people should know who was in the wrong. Linda signed the papers, but the divorce process was slow, very slow. On the first weekend I had the kids over, Nick asked if I would ever come back home. "No, I'm sorry, son, but I won't," I replied, holding back tears. Over the next few months, the kids stayed with me every other weekend and a few days during school breaks. The divorce became final, and Linda didn't get any of our savings, though she did have the last laugh. My lawyer had warned me I wouldn't come out of this situation unscathed. He should have said financially unscathed. In the end, I was paying half the mortgage and child support. I didn't mind the latter, but it infuriated me that I had to pay spousal support to Linda. She would receive alimony for 5 years or until she remarried. One weekend, I found out from the kids that Alan had moved into the house, which didn't really surprise me. What made me furious was that Linda had told them they should call him Dad. There was no way I would tolerate that. On Sunday, I dropped the kids off and asked Linda if we could talk. We stepped into the garden so the kids wouldn't hear us, while Alan sat on the terrace, smoking a cigar. "The kids told me that you're telling them they should call that snake Dad. Is that true?" "Yes, I decided they need a father figure around, and since Alan is here and you're not, they can call him Dad." "Like hell they can. They are my children, and I won't let them call that scumbag Dad." Alan stood up as if he was about to start something. "Sit down, idiot. Unless you want to get another beating," I warned. Linda just stared at me, her arms crossed in front of her. "I'm serious, Linda. You should not let the kids call that creature Dad. I'll agree to them calling him Uncle Alan, but nothing more. When they're old enough, they can call him any damn name they want. And just to put things in perspective, now that you and that bastard are living here, I'm reducing my mortgage payments by 1/3. He can cover the difference." I left them both in stunned silence. After that conversation, things between Linda and me got so bad that I stopped entering the house when picking up or dropping off the kids on weekends. Work started going well, and I got a promotion with a substantial salary increase. I didn't tell Linda or the kids, fearing she might demand more money. As it turned out, I needn't have worried. The next time I picked up the kids, Linda asked if she could talk to me. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we ended up in the garden again. "Don, I thought you should know. Alan asked me to marry him." I didn't respond. I just shrugged and walked away, smiling. Those idiots clearly forgot that if Linda got married, my spousal support payments would stop. The Monday after their wedding, I canceled the direct deposit. When Linda asked where her money was that month, I replied, "You got married, Linda," which released me from the obligation to make monthly payments. I hung up the phone smiling. Just before I did, I heard Linda mutter the word, "Dan." In a way, I was still angry, as I was still paying 1/3 of the mortgage, though I had agreed to it so the kids would have a roof over their heads. Thanks to the raise and the money I saved by not paying Linda, I got a mortgage and bought myself a house. The kids liked the house, even though it needed a lot of work. Nick was 14 and fully understood why Linda and I divorced. I think Gail knew too, but she didn't talk about it. With the kids' help, I tackled the garden. The grass in the backyard was so tall, I half expected to find an undiscovered tribe camping in it. The kids had their own rooms, and I let them choose the colors, within reason of course. One day, Linda asked if I could take the kids for the following weekend too, as she and Alan apparently needed some alone time. I politely declined, telling her I had plans for the weekend. In reality, I had no plans, but I wasn't about to help her out. My new neighbors welcomed me warmly, and my kids made friends with 2 children from the house next door. The only person living alone on the street was a 60-year-old widow. I wasn't looking to meet anyone since my focus was on the kids. But everything changed when my neighbor Nicola introduced me to her sister Judy. I was surprised that Judy had never been married, especially considering how beautiful she was. Judy was about 5'4", with a medium build and curves in all the right places. That's how I would describe her. After a few dates, I introduced Judy to my kids. I'm not sure if Judy was nervous, but I'm certain she was. They all got along so well that by the end of the evening, we were acting like a regular family. Gail really took a liking to Judy, asking her for advice several times. I found out why a few weeks later when I was driving them home. Linda and Alan weren't getting along. I guess marriage is different from casual sex. Linda had started drinking heavily at home, while Alan spent most evenings out at pubs and bars. Things got so bad that one evening, Gail called and asked if I could come over and help. Linda was drunk and in bad shape. I helped Gail get Linda upstairs. Gail undressed her mother and put her to bed. Alan was nowhere to be seen the whole time. The three of us had just sat down when there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw 2 police officers. "How can I help you, officers? We're looking for Mrs. Carter." "Sorry, she's upstairs in bed. I doubt I'll be able to wake her tonight. I'm her ex-husband. Is there anything I can help with?" I spent a few minutes explaining why I was there, and the kids confirmed my story. The officers then gave me the bad news. Mr. Alan Carter was killed this evening. He crashed his car into a tree, and I'm afraid he died instantly. I assured the officers that I would stay and tell my ex-wife when she woke up in the morning. The kids were quiet, but neither of them cried when the officers told us about Alan. "This is going to destroy Mom," Nick said, looking at Gail. She nodded in agreement. I told them to go to bed and that we would deal with it in the morning. As much as I despised Alan for what he had done, I didn't want to be the one to tell Linda about his death. The next morning, Linda staggered down the stairs, looking awful with a hangover. The drinking had clearly taken a toll on her appearance. She glared at me and aggressively asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" I explained that I had come over last night when Gail called for help. "Well, as you can see, I'm fine. You can leave." "Linda, you better sit down and shut up," I replied. Linda looked at me, then decided to sit down. "All right, what's all this about, Don? I don't have time for games." "No games, Linda. While you were passed out drunk last night, the police came by." "What do they want from me? I haven't done anything wrong." "I'm sorry, Linda. They came because of Alan. The police came to tell you that Alan died in a car accident last night. All we know is that he crashed his car into a tree, and they suspect he was drunk." Linda sat there, staring at me for what felt like an eternity. Then she buried her head in her hands and started sobbing. The kids tried to comfort her, but it was pointless. I stayed just in case I was needed, but after about an hour, I apologized and left. As I mentioned before, I despised Alan for what he and Linda did to destroy our family, but I never wished him dead. Out of respect for him and for the sake of the kids, I attended his funeral. Linda didn't speak to me, but her parents thanked me for being there to support her. I'm here for the kids and no other reason. As far as I'm concerned, Linda brought all of this on herself. Linda's parents looked shocked, then quietly turned and walked away. I stood with the kids while Linda stayed by the grave. One evening, about a month after the funeral, I got a frantic call from Nick. "Dad, please come quickly. Mom's lost it. She hit Gail and is throwing things around like a madwoman." I told him I was on my way and rushed to my car, then sped toward the house. On the way, I called the police and explained what Nick had told me. They said a few officers were already on their way. I arrived at the house just before the police and ran inside, leaving the door open. The house looked like a war zone. Linda was completely drunk and throwing things around. "You bastard. This is all your damn fault," she screamed at me as something flew past my head. I dodged whatever was being thrown and rushed over to Gail, who was lying on the floor. 2 police officers came in and immediately subdued Linda. She was still cursing and calling me every name under the sun, then turned on the officers, calling them all sorts of nasty names. As the officers led Linda outside to the waiting police van, paramedics arrived and were tending to Gail while I spoke with one of the officers. I glanced back and saw Nick coming down the stairs with a bloody towel on his head. "Sorry, Dad. I tried to stop Mom from hitting Gail. She turned on me and hit me over the head with something heavy. That's when I called you. Don't worry, son. You did everything you could," I reassured Nick. Nick and Gail started to come around, and one of the paramedics examined Nick. "You got a nasty cut, young man. I'm afraid you'll need stitches." Nick winced slightly when the paramedic gave him the news. The kids were taken to the hospital for further evaluation, and I assured them I would join them as soon as I finished speaking with the police. At the hospital, the doctor said that Gail was in shock, but other than that, she didn't have any serious injuries. Nick had to get stitches for his cut. The doctor advised both of them to take it easy for a few days. The next day, I took them back to the house so they could each pack a bag. I told them to pack enough for at least a week. I had no idea what was going to happen with Linda, but at that moment, I didn't care. Back at my place, I told the kids to unpack, and then we would figure out dinner. Takeout seemed like the best option since I wasn't in the mood to cook. While the kids were unpacking, I sat down with a cup of coffee, but my peace was interrupted by a knock on the door. I opened it to see Judy standing there. I came to visit my sister and noticed your car outside. Is everything okay, Don? Not really, Judy. You'd better come in. I told her what had happened earlier. Oh my God, are the kids okay? They're upstairs unpacking their things. I told them I'd order takeout once they're done. No, Don, no takeout. You go check on the kids and I'll start cooking. If I can't find something, I'll ask, or I'll borrow it from the nice lady next door. We both laughed at that joke. When the kids came downstairs, Gail immediately ran over to Judy for a hug. I could barely hold back tears as I realized my daughter felt safer with someone she had only known for a few months than with her own mother. Linda's parents took her into their care but foolishly brought her back to the house instead of taking her to their home. I later found out that Linda was charged with assaulting the children as well as a police officer. Apparently, when they removed her handcuffs at the station, she broke free and hit the officer who had arrested her. One morning, when Linda was out of the house, I went in and gathered the rest of the kids' belongings. I didn't file for custody, I just wasn't going to leave them with her anymore, and to hell with the law. Linda received 2 years of probation for the assault charges and was ordered to seek help for her drinking problem. Her parents finally realized how bad things were and took her to live with them. Linda's father suggested I sell a house and she had no intention of returning anytime soon. I thought about moving back in with the kids, but they didn't want to return to the house I still considered mine. I sold the house fairly quickly. After all the expenses were covered, I put the remaining amount in the bank. By law, I owed Linda half, but she couldn't access it until she dealt with her drinking problem. For me and the kids, life went on. Strangely, they didn't seem bothered by Linda's absence. Gail formed an incredibly strong bond with Judy, stronger than I had ever seen, and Nick made new friends and looked happier than he had in years. I didn't keep track of how Linda was doing, and her parents didn't feel the need to keep me updated either. I didn't know it at the time, but everything was about to change. It started when the kids went to bed, and Judy asked if we could talk. In my head, I heard the dreaded phrase, "We need to talk." Of course, Judy, what's on your mind? I want to talk about us. By us, I mean me, you, and the kids. I just stared at her and nodded. I know things haven't been easy for you lately with the divorce and with you becoming a part-time dad. What I'm trying to say is I really admire you for being such a strong person, and that admiration has grown into love. I love you, Don. I just need to know if you feel anything for me. Wow. For a few moments, I was stunned. I saw Judy looking at me, waiting for an answer. Judy, I really do love you. I guess with everything going on, I just haven't told you. You've helped me so much over the last few months, and I know I wouldn't have managed as well as we have without you. So yes, I love you, and please don't think I'm saying this lightly. I'm sorry if I haven't shown you how much you mean to me. Don, I knew you loved me. I just needed to hear you say it, you big fool. Not telling me you love me is one of the few things you've missed lately. Do you know that Gail has started her period? Oh my God. No, I didn't know. When did it start? She came to me a few weeks before the incident with Linda. Girls these days know more than I did at her age, but she was still worried. One day she even called me mom, and I don't think she realized she did it. Maybe that's because you've been more of a mother to her lately. Honestly, I hadn't known or noticed anything. I wasn't surprised that Gail went to Judy about her period. No girl would want to discuss that with her dad. I sat down and smiled at Judy, and she looked at me in confusion. Judy, I want to ask you something, and please be honest with me. If I asked you to marry me, would you want to have more children in the future? Judy sat down and smiled. If you ask me to marry you, my answer will be yes. As for children, the answer is no. And now it's my turn to be honest. I've known for many years that I can't have children. That probably explains why I'm still unmarried. As soon as a guy finds out I can't have kids, he finds an excuse to leave. I come to love your children as if they were my own. They're wonderful, and that's because of you. Judy joined me on the couch, and we hugged and started kissing. It didn't take long before we went upstairs to bed. We both agreed not to tell the kids about our conversation. I told Judy I wanted to talk to them alone first. That was a little white lie. The next day, I left work early and headed to a local jewelry store. After explaining to the saleswoman that I wanted a ring and giving her an idea of the size, I started browsing. Not wanting to rush things, I decided to head home at my usual time, but due to traffic issues, I ended up arriving 10 minutes later than usual. While I would typically change before dinner, I sat down to eat in my suit. When we finished eating, I stood up, and Judy and the kids probably assumed I was going to change clothes. Judy was just about to stand up and start clearing the table when I dropped to one knee, holding an open ring box in front of me. "Judy, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Finally. Thank God." "I didn't think you'd ever figure it out, Dad," Nick said with a smile. Judy was still in shock. She looked at the ring, then at me. Yes, I will," she said before bursting into tears. Judy stood up and hugged me. She sniffled and wiped her eyes before kissing me. The tears started again when Gail hugged us both. "Does this mean I can start calling you Mom now?" Judy and Gail hugged, and Nick shook my hand and gave me a manly hug. It was then that I realized neither of the kids had mentioned their mother or how she might react. Personally, I didn't care. In my eyes, it wasn't her business. When the kids visited Linda, they told her that I was getting married again. She just shrugged and changed the subject. Nick told me that Linda was getting help for her drinking, and she looked much better than the last time they saw her. By this time, I had filed for and been granted legal custody of the kids. Linda had generous visitation rights, but for some reason known only to her, she saw the kids at best once a month. After making sure Linda was no longer drinking, I wrote her a check for half of the house sale. She thanked me and didn't say much else. Her father thanked me for giving her the money, saying they hoped she would use it to start a new life. Shortly after Judy and I got married, the kids went to visit Linda, but they came back saying she wasn't there, and her parents had no idea where she was. Judy said Linda was probably starting a new life and would get in touch once she settled, but that never happened. One evening, Linda's father called and said he had bad news. We sat down as he explained that Linda had left and moved in with a guy she met in rehab. It turned out the guy was using drugs. According to the police, Linda and this man, James, died from a drug overdose. He had started using again, and Linda got hooked too. After Linda's funeral, the kids never mentioned her again, at least not in my presence. Gail treated Judy as her mother, and Nick started calling her Mom after we got married. As I watched Judy interact with the kids, I couldn't help but think about how Linda had ruined her life and then completely destroyed it by getting into drugs and ending it all. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.